why is it painful when we go through a breakup, even when we know the person wasn't the right person for us?
Wow. Well, I think in a sense, there's two types of breakups where someone is wrong for us. There's the kind where we don't know that they're wrong for us and we've told ourselves they are the one.
Ooh.
And then they break up with us. Because normally if we haven't told ourselves someone is wrong, then we're just hanging on for dear life, wanting to keep them. But if they break up with us, it's like, in a sense, there's an extra pain of we have to even get to the realization that they were wrong for us, which takes some time, because when someone breaks up with us, our ego kicks in and tells us it's because you're not good enough, it's because you're not worthy, it's because, and if you were just more, if you just did better, if you just didn't make that mistake, if you just weren't so high maintenance in this way, you would have been able to hold on to this person. And because you're not sexy enough, cool enough, successful enough, interesting enough, whatever, thin enough, young enough, whatever, you couldn't hold on to this person. And it often takes us time to realize this wasn't the right person for me. Some people, by the way, who are watching this still haven't gotten there. It was years since that person broke up with them, and they're still telling themselves a story that that person was the right person.
That's agonizing.
Yes, because it's you don't get to ever kind of reach the other side of the grief when you tell yourself that. You're in chronic grief instead of the acute grief of breakup, grieving the end of the relationship, grieving the future you thought you'd have, feeling the disappointment of it all, and then moving on to create a new and better story. Instead, you're in the chronic grief of continuing to tell yourself a story that your right person they're still out there. They just don't want to be with you anymore.
Oh man.
Then there's what you're talking about.
And they might be with someone else.
And they're with someone else. And so we experience that grief 1,000 times. You experience it the moment you realize they're with someone else. You experience it the moment they propose to that person. You realize that you experience it again the moment they have a child. You're experiencing the grief over and over and over again. The kind you're talking about where you know while you're in it that it's the wrong relationship, I think that the heartbreak there is the so much of it relates to the fear and the disappointment of, oh my God, I'm back on my own again. And that fear of uprooting our life again, of changing our life. Well, firstly, if someone has gone as far as marrying a person, or you've just been enmeshed with someone for many years, you don't even have to be married. Your lives could be so intertwined at this point that leaving is like throwing a grenade in your own life.
Yeah, friends, family, maybe you live together, maybe there's, all these other things that you've been intertwining.
And the identity.
Oh.
That was my identity, that relationship, that was my life, that was my life as I knew it. It was my life as my community, the people around me knew it. So I now have to sort of recreate my life and build from the ground up again. It can feel like for so many people, of course, we add marriage into it, and often there's financial implications, and there's, sometimes there's children, and there are so many layers of complication, and we may have had this fear gnawing away at us that someone was wrong a long time ago, but it's hard to be the one that lights the fuse that blows up your own life.
Ooh.
And it's easier when someone breaks up with us in many ways, because at least we feel like we're on the receiving end. I didn't have a choice. But you're having to...
But I'm not good enough. If they broke up with me,
then I have that to deal with. Like, I don't feel good enough. But at least they pulled the trigger. Yeah. But to be the one, it's funny, in boxing a lot of the time, and you know this, when you spar with someone, once you get hit, and you get hit hard, it's almost easier to then retaliate. But it's hard to be the one to throw the first big punch.
Yeah.
It's like, when you're the one breaking up with someone, because they're wrong, it's hard to be like, if I just kept going with this, it would just continue for another 5 years. And my life,
they're not going to break up with me.
They're not going to break up with me, so it would stay comfortable, or it would stay. But if I'm breaking up with them, I'm the one who has to detonate. I'm the one who has to throw the punch. And that's the hard part, is we have to, on some level, it can feel like I'm having to blow up my own life for the hope of a better life,
wow,
which hasn't materialized yet. So it's terrifying because it's like jumping off a cliff without a parachute. I don't know if a better life is coming. I don't know if I'm going to be alone forever and never find anyone again. Is life going to punish me for letting go of this in the form of never serving me up another great relationship or another relationship period? You know, some people it's, am I too old now to find another person? Am I going to go out there and find that I'm invisible? Has my window passed? Then you throw into it biology. You know, am I going to meet someone in time to have children because I know I really want to have children? And is that going to, am I taking that possibility off the table for me by leaving this relationship? There's so many layers of complication that the heartbreak is so complex. It's fear, it's grief, it's disappointment, it's the anxiety of your dreams never coming true now as a result of leaving this relationship. It's all really, really hard.
Oh man, the quote in your book that you mentioned, you have to be willing to light the fuse that blows up your own life. And you say, if you stay where you are, you'll never be happy and you will never be at peace. And I'm assuming you're speaking around if you're staying in a relationship that is not working or that's not the right fit for you. If you stay where you are, you'll never be happy and you'll never be at peace.
And certainly one that's, you know, that's abusive or one that's narcissistic, one where you have believed it's going to change for so long and there's been no evidence for the fact that the relationship is going to change. Or
yes.
You've tried everything. You've brought, you know, vulnerability to it, you've brought standards to it, you've, you know, changed what you give that person. You've done so much to try to make this relationship into a great one or a peaceful one or just one that doesn't harm you.
Right. And
it never works and there's never change. There is a certain point where you have to say to yourself, how many I think it's a question that's worth us all asking in life is, how many times does something not have to work for me to decide it's not going to work? And your answer to that question will dictate how much of your life you will, you know, throw into a situation.
Yeah, because you can justify, well, it wasn't that bad, or my, you know, friend's partner is worse than my partner. You compare yourself to other relationships, right? You'll do these things to justify. And you're like, well, I don't want to be so strict where they have to be perfect because I'm not perfect, but I don't want to be too flexible that I get walked on all the time. So it's like a dance of figuring out. And it's almost like if you have to say, how many more times am I going to put up with this until I get out? It's almost like when you say that, that's the time to get out. Because you're not going to change the person in front of you. They're not going to change overnight unless they choose to change, from my understanding. You can't force them to change.
Well, someone has to be for change to happen, a lot has to happen. You know, like change is very, very hard. We both operate in a space that's predicated on the idea that people can change. Right? So if we didn't start by believing that, we're in trouble. You and I shouldn't have a job.
Yes.
So we start from that foundation that you and I must both believe that people can change. Otherwise, why make a podcast?
Right.
But we also then have to get very sober about how hard change is.
And what needs to happen in order for someone to want to change.
Well, look at what has to happen for us to change, even when we want to.
Yeah.
Every year on January 1st, most of the world, whether they articulate it or not, make some kind of promise to themselves about something they want to do differently. You know, we'll call it a resolution, or I'm going to ingrain this new habit, or I'm going to make a change this year, or someone, whether spelling it out or just on some level, feels this, I want to do something different. And if only the wanting it to be different made it different. It doesn't. There's still so much, all our work is ahead of us after that. And anyone who's ever been to therapy knows that you set foot in the door because you want something to change, right? You show up because you want something to be different. And then you get there and you realize there's an awful lot of self-awareness around what needs to change for it to be different that you need to gain. And then past that, you need the the discipline to go out there and actually do the uncomfortable thing over and over and over again until it starts to become something that starts to become more natural to you, or at the very least, just something that's you're a little bit less uncomfortable with. That's how hard it is. If I've got a habit or something that's hurting me on my life, I might be aware of it, but now I have to actually do the uncomfortable thing and do something different to what I normally do. And that takes time and effort and energy. And even then I might only change it by 5 or 10%. But that 5 or 10% luckily is often enough to set us on a different enough trajectory in our life that we can get new results.
Absolutely.
And that's a wonderful thing. We don't go to therapy and get a personality transplant.
Right.
We might get put on a 5%, 10% different trajectory. And over time, that creates a very different life.
Absolutely.
So let's look at that in the context of a relationship with someone who's behaving in a way you're not happy with. Even if they want to change, which is a big leap in the first place, do they want to change? Or are they just annoyed that you're annoyed? Are they just frustrated that you're frustrated? Because that's not the same as them wanting to change. That's just them wanting you to stop being so frustrated or on their case all the time. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's not them wanting to change. Them wanting to change is them recognizing that there's something about this in themselves that they don't like, that they want to address, or that they care about you so much that they want to bring you something different. And that's motivation enough for them to make a change. A big leap. Then after that, they've got to learn how to change, and then they've got to have the discipline to go forward and make those changes. And even if they did all of that, which if someone's having this conversation with me, it normally means that that person's not doing any of those things. Mm-hmm. Right? Because we're still struggling so much because our partner isn't saying any of those things. Yes. But even if they were, the changes might be 5 to 10%. They're not going to be a personality transplant. And a lot of people who come to me in really unhappy or very toxic, painful, abusive, or narcissistic relationships are in a place where their partner would need a personality transplant for them to be happy.